She wasn't supposed to be on that list. That's what screwed with my head the most. The list was for volunteer access, just names and emails of people who'd been cleared for the logistics team at the hotel conference we were setting up. I was helping manage AV systems and tech support for this regional thing my company sponsors every year. I saw her name on the list printed out at the front desk, second column, sixth row, Sienna Hale. My wife. Not Sienna from marketing. Not Sienna from the events team. Sienna Hale, the woman who swore she was heading out of town that weekend for a wellness retreat in Tofino with her yoga group. So unless she'd started volunteering for hotel tech support under a fake job title, something wasn't adding up. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Someone else with the same name. But then I saw the room assignment. Same last 4 digits of her phone number next to her name in the registration database. Same damn cursive signature in the volunteer waiver file. My stomach dropped in a way that didn't feel dramatic. It just felt cold. Like someone shut off a furnace inside my chest and the heat wasn't coming back. I didn't say anything to anyone. I finished my setup. I ran checks on the projectors. I helped plug in mic receivers and did all the same shit I always do because that's who I am, methodical, quiet, make no waves. But something in my head was screaming. I waited. I didn't call her. Didn't text her. If she was here, then sooner or later I'd see her. And sure enough, I did. Not right away. Not in some dramatic hallway scene. I saw her around 11 that night. I was heading back to my car to grab a replacement HDMI cable when I spotted her across the parking lot in one of the smoking areas, even though she doesn't smoke. She was standing there laughing, her hand resting lightly on the arm of some guy in a slate gray blazer. He looked relaxed. Not like a coworker. Not like a friend. Like someone who didn't need to explain why her hand was on his chest for a solid 5 seconds while they talked. She was dressed like she wasn't supposed to be noticed, but I noticed. I watched from the back of the lot, just standing there like an idiot with a cable in my hand and 100 curses in my head. I didn't confront her then. I just stood there long enough to see her follow him back inside the hotel through the side entrance. That wasn't the way to the lobby or to the event floors. That was the hallway that led straight to the elevator banks. I didn't move. I stood there in the same spot, cable still in hand, until a breeze hit me hard enough to shake me out of it. My legs were shaking, but not from anger, yet. From this feeling I couldn't shake, this sudden understanding that the woman I'd built a life with was living another one at the same time, just out of frame, like I'd missed some hidden camera filming the real version of her while I got the decoy. The next morning, I showed up early, earlier than anyone needed to be there. I knew where they were staying. The hotel registry listed her under conference logistics, and that got her a discount on one of the upper floor rooms. I took the service elevator with a guy I know from facilities, nodded like I was just heading up to check a panel. I waited down the hall from her room and watched. They came out around 9:10 a.m. He was adjusting his belt. She had her hair tied up, no makeup, hoodie zipped to the neck. They looked casual, comfortable, like people who'd slept well and fucked even better. She didn't even glance around. Didn't even hesitate when she leaned in and kissed him quick but not apologetic, right before they walked off together toward the breakfast area. That's when I knew. Not guessed. Not suspected. Knew. And knowing didn't feel like a dramatic explosion. It felt like someone took a wet towel and smothered my entire chest with it. You think you'll lose your shit in moments like that. You don't. You just stop feeling normal. Your hands feel disconnected from your arms. Your vision narrows a bit. You breathe differently, shorter. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I just stood there and told myself I wasn't going to say anything. Not yet. I was going to let her life first. I drove home that night before she did. Sat on the couch, watched a muted TV screen while thinking about the towel she always packed for yoga retreats. The one she didn't bring this time. I realized she wasn't lying about everything, just enough. Enough to get away with it for as long as she could. Enough to keep me tired and distracted and convinced that marriage is just a dry season, not a fucking sinkhole. When she got home Sunday night, I was in the kitchen. She kissed me on the cheek, told me she was exhausted, that the retreat was emotionally intense. I nodded, handed her a glass of water, and asked her how the coast was. She said, foggy but peaceful. I said, good to know. She asked me how the conference went. I said, exactly how I expected. And she didn't blink. That was the first real confirmation. Not the kiss. Not the room. Her face, completely still, no twitch, no guilt, just smooth lies like she'd rehearsed them. And that's when I knew I wasn't going to just catch her. I was going to burn her entire fucking story to the ground. I gave it 5 more days. I wasn't going to act on impulse, not when something this serious was unfolding right in front of me. I didn't storm in with accusations or throw tantrums like some emotional mess looking to start a fight. No, I needed her calm. I needed her thinking everything was just fine, that I was the same predictable, dependable husband she'd grown used to. People let their guard down when they think they've gotten away with it, and that's when you get the truth. I didn't want suspicions. I wanted facts. I needed to know exactly what she was hiding, how deep it went, and how many lies I had been fed without even knowing. The 6th day gave me everything I was waiting for. She had a client shoot and left the house in a rush. Her laptop was still on the kitchen counter, open, logged in, as if the password didn't matter anymore. She used to be so careful, always closing things down or flipping the screen when I walked past. That had stopped recently. Maybe she thought I wouldn't care. Maybe she forgot who I was. I sat down quietly, heart steady, hands calm, and opened her email. Not the inbox. I didn't expect anything there. It was the drafts folder that gave it away. 3 unsent messages, each one like a punch in the chest, because they weren't about work. They weren't about her schedule. They were personal. Detailed. The kind of things you don't write unless there's something to hide. The first one was a list of times and places she had been with someone. The second had a short message about how different things felt when she was with him, how easy it was to forget about everything else. The third message mentioned me, casually. It wasn't hateful, just dismissive. He probably doesn't notice. He's kind but too quiet. Always polite. Doesn't question things. That was the line that got to me. Not because she said I didn't notice, but because she thought that was a good thing. Like I was some harmless piece of background noise in her life, there to hold things together while she lived a different one behind my back. I backed up the drafts and checked her folders. She used an online drive for her work, and I remembered she always kept a project references folder for visual inspiration. I clicked through it out of habit, not expecting to find anything real. But inside was a subfolder with a name that didn't match her usual client codes. Just a date, about 2 months before our anniversary. Inside were photos that didn't belong to any project. Casual shots. Smiling selfies. Restaurant tables. A photo of 2 cups of coffee with initials drawn in foam. Pictures of places I'd never been. Places I'd never heard her mention. It wasn't dramatic or inappropriate. It was ordinary. That's what made it worse. It was quiet, planned, and real. I stared at the photos, reading the dates, piecing the story together. Every weekend she said she was too busy. Every day she needed time to clear her head. All those long edits at her studio that went past midnight. This was where that time had gone. Not to herself. Not to her work. To someone else. Someone who didn't have to hear about my day. Someone who wasn't there during the hard months when we were stretched thin, figuring things out. Someone who only saw her at her best, because that's all she chose to show him. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I didn't break anything. I copied what I needed and put everything back exactly the way it was. She came home later that day like nothing happened, made small talk in the kitchen, and even joked about how busy next week would be. I smiled, nodded, played along. She said she might have to go out of town again for another shoot. I told her that sounded exciting. She looked relieved, as if she still had me fooled. That night, I lay awake next to her. She turned in her sleep and reached for me like she always did, mumbled something about setting an early alarm. I stayed still. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about how far from the truth we had drifted. It wasn't just that she lied. It was how normal it had become for her. How comfortable she was saying one thing and doing another, expecting me never to question it. That's what hurt the most, not the other person, not even the secrecy. It was the way she had decided I didn't need to know because I didn't matter enough to consider. I didn't know who he was yet. I hadn't seen a name, just glimpses of a face and reflections, arms and photos, shadows in the background. But I was going to find out. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to walk out. I was going to bring this all to the surface on my terms. Quietly. Clearly. Completely. She would hear it from me, and she wouldn't be able to hide behind anything. I wasn't after revenge. I was after the truth. And once I had it, she would finally have to face what she had done, without stories, without excuses. I waited until Sunday evening. I chose that time because we always made dinner together on Sundays. It was our thing, something we'd done for years without thinking much of it. That routine made it easier to bring up anything serious without it feeling staged. I didn't set traps or try to catch her in a lie. I had all the proof I needed. I had dates, photos, messages, and everything else in a folder on my phone. I didn't want her to admit it just because I confronted her. I wanted her to choose honesty on her own, without me showing my cards. That's the only way I could know how far she was willing to go to keep hiding it. We were standing by the stove, and I asked her how her week was shaping up. She told me she had 2 shoots coming up, one out of town. I stirred the sauce and waited a few seconds before I asked her what hotel she was staying in. She looked confused at first, like she didn't expect that question. Hotel, she said. You said you're going out of town, I replied, keeping my tone flat. Just wondering where you're staying. She hesitated. It was small, barely a pause, but I noticed. Then she said the name of a place in Victoria that we'd stayed at once 2 years ago. The kind of answer you give when you need something that sounds real without having to think too hard. I nodded and turned the stove off. I checked the volunteer list for the conference last week, I said as I placed the spoon in the sink. You were on it. She froze. I watched her hands, her shoulders, her face. She didn't even blink. That told me everything. There wasn't any confusion, no denial, no attempt to pretend she didn't know what I meant. You saw that? She asked after a long silence. I did, I answered. Her mouth tightened a bit, and she stepped back from the counter like she needed space to think. That wasn't supposed to, she started, but then stopped herself. I didn't know you were involved this year. You weren't supposed to be there at all, I said. You told me you were at a retreat. She nodded slowly, like she knew the conversation was over before it began. Are you going to tell me the truth now? I asked. Or are you going to wait until I show you everything? She looked down, breathing through her nose, and then leaned against the fridge without saying anything. I watched her, giving her time, but she didn't speak. That silence was louder than any excuse. I already know who he is, I lied, just to see if she'd ask which one. She didn't. She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them and looked at me directly. It's been a few months, she said. It started after that week in March when I stayed late at the studio. That's when it began. I let that sit between us for a moment. Why him? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, I don't know. It just happened. It didn't just happen, I replied. People don't accidentally make plans, book rooms, write messages they never send. You made choices. Over and over. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she said, I didn't mean for it to get serious. Was it serious? I asked. I don't know anymore, she said. It was exciting. Different. I felt like someone else. So who am I? I asked. The person you come home to when you're done pretending? She rubbed her hands together, staring at the floor. I didn't want to hurt you, she said. But you did, I told her. You chose to lie to me. Over and over. I gave you room. I didn't crowd you. I never doubted you. And you used that to keep this going. She nodded, but it didn't look like guilt. It looked like someone accepting something that finally caught up to them. I was going to end it, she said. I just didn't know how. You should have told me the truth before it got this far, I said. You owed me that. She looked up and finally said, I know. We stood there in silence. I didn't feel better. I didn't feel worse. I just felt done. There was no shouting, no name-calling, no drama. Just 2 people standing in the kitchen, realizing they weren't who they thought they were anymore. I'm not asking you to explain everything right now, I said. But I need to know what you want. If this was just something to get out of your system or if you've already decided you don't want this life anymore. I haven't figured that out yet, she admitted. I'm not going to wait forever, I said. You need to decide. Quickly. I understand, she said. I walked out of the kitchen and sat on the couch. She didn't follow. She didn't say anything else. That's how the night ended, quiet, cold, and nothing like the Sunday nights we used to have. And somehow, that felt exactly right. I gave her a week. I didn't ask any questions during that time. I didn't push for more details or pretend things were normal. We shared the same space, went about our routines, but we barely spoke. She knew I was waiting for her decision, and I wasn't going to ask twice. On the 8th day, I told her I'd be spending the weekend out of town. She didn't ask where or why, and I didn't offer anything. That silence was all the confirmation I needed that she hadn't made a choice. Or maybe she had, and just didn't want to say it out loud. Either way, it gave me what I needed. She wanted to keep playing quiet, so I gave her space to do it while I handled things my way. I spent the weekend meeting with a lawyer. I brought every piece of evidence I had. Printed messages, copies of photos, timelines of her fake work trips, and even the draft email she had forgotten to delete. The lawyer didn't say much at first, just read through the folder while I sat there in silence. After a few minutes, he nodded and said, If this is accurate and you've got proof of everything, you'll be in a strong position. That was all I needed to hear. We drafted the initial paperwork that day. I didn't plan to serve her immediately. I needed to take one more step before I dropped it all on her. I went in his workplace. She hadn't given me his name directly, but she left just enough behind for me to figure it out. The man she was meeting wasn't some stranger from the internet or someone from a different city. He worked 3 blocks away in a development firm that had partnered with some of her past clients. That's how it started. Business, then coffee, then something else. I walked into his office building around noon, went straight to the receptionist, and asked for him. She told me he was in a meeting. I gave her my name and told her I'd wait. When he came out, he looked like he'd just walked off a magazine cover, clean shirt, tailored pants, confident smirk. I stood up and introduced myself. At first, he didn't react. Then I saw his face shift slightly when I said her name. "Can I help you with something?" he asked. "You already did," I said. "You gave me everything I needed." He frowned, looked toward the receptionist, then back at me. "If you've got something to say, say it," he said, voice low. "I'm not here to argue," I told him. "I just wanted you to know I've filed for divorce, and I've included your name in the documentation. There's enough in there for your company's HR to take notice." His mouth tightened. "I don't know what she told you," he began, but I cut him off. "She didn't need to tell me anything," I said. "You were both careless." I put the pieces together on my own. He took a step closer, his voice tense. "This doesn't have to get ugly." "It's not ugly," I said. "It's clean, organized, and legal. You'll get your copy soon." Then I turned and walked away. He didn't follow. That same night, I came home and printed everything again. This time, I left the folder on the kitchen table with a note on top that said, "We're done pretending. These are your copies. You'll hear from my lawyer by Monday." I didn't wait for her to find it. I packed a bag and left the house without saying a word. I went to stay with my brother for a few days. I needed space, and I didn't want to watch her read those papers or listen to her explanations. She called once. I let it ring. Then she texted me, asking if we could talk. I didn't answer. The next morning, she sent a longer message. Said she didn't want things to end this way, that she knew she'd made mistakes, that she was willing to do whatever it took to fix things. I still didn't reply. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had already said it. If she couldn't take that seriously when I gave her the chance, there was no point in having the conversation now. By Monday, her tone changed. She said she was shocked I went through with it, said I should have talked to her before filing. That was the moment I realized she still didn't understand. She still thought this was something I would get over, something I would forgive if she cried enough or said the right words. She didn't understand that the betrayal wasn't just about who she spent time with. It was about the fact that she did it behind my back for months and thought I was too dull or too trusting to figure it out. I returned to the house on Tuesday to pick up the rest of my things. She was there, waiting in the living room, folder open on her lap. Her face was calm, but her eyes were red. "You really did it," she said. "Yes," I answered. "I thought you'd talk to me first." "I did," I told her. "You just didn't take it seriously." "I made a mistake," she said. "I know that now." "I'm sure you do," I said. "But now it's not about what you know. It's about what happens next." She nodded and didn't say anything else. I packed my things without speaking. She watched, but didn't stop me. And when I walked out the door, she stayed on the couch, folder still in her hands, everything spelled out in plain text. No shouting. No chaos. Just the truth, finally sitting in front of her, too late to change anything. It had been 3 days since I left the house, and I hadn't spoken a word to her since then. I ignored her messages, skipped the calls, and didn't bother to open any of the emails she sent. I needed time to think without being pulled back into her version of the story. I wasn't looking for comfort, and I wasn't hoping for closure through a conversation filled with apologies that didn't mean anything anymore. But eventually, I knew we had to talk. Not to save anything, not to reconcile, but to finish it in a way that left no doubts on either side. We agreed to meet at a small cafe not far from the house. It wasn't a place we used to go together, which made it easier. I got there first, ordered a coffee, and waited. She showed up 5 minutes late, walked in quietly, spotted me, and sat down without saying anything. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired you get from lack of sleep, but the kind that comes from holding things in too long. I didn't say anything at first. I let her sit there and feel the weight of it. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, eyes down on the table. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "We need to say what needs to be said and move on." She nodded, took a breath, and looked at me directly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't know if that matters now, but I need to say it." "You're right," I replied. It doesn't change anything. She didn't argue. She sat with her hands folded, like she was waiting to be judged. I didn't expect you to find out, she said after a pause. That much is obvious, I said. You got careless. I wasn't trying to humiliate you, she added quickly. It wasn't about hurting you. But you did hurt me, I told her. You made choices that took time and effort. You lied, covered things up, pretended nothing was wrong. You were careful, until you weren't. So don't say it wasn't about me. She stayed quiet for a long moment, then said, I didn't feel anything for a while. I felt like we were just moving through life, like something was missing. Then you should have told me that, I said. You should have said you were unhappy before you went looking for something else behind my back. I didn't know how to say it, she said. And when it started, I didn't plan for it to go that far. I gave you a week to tell me the truth before I said a word, I said. I gave you the chance to fix it before I made any decisions. You didn't take it. That's what I can't forgive. She leaned back in her chair, nodding slowly, her eyes beginning to fill up, but I could tell she was trying to hold it together. So this is it? She asked. You're done. I was done the night you stood in our kitchen and lied to my face even after I gave you a chance to be honest, I said. This meeting isn't about convincing me to change my mind. It's about ending it like adults. I don't know how to do that, she said. You just listen, I said. You don't interrupt. You accept it. She looked down again, and for a second I thought she was going to walk out, but she stayed. You broke something I can't repair, I continued. It's not about the other man. It's about the fact that you looked at me every day and decided that I wasn't worth the truth. You made a second life and expected me to keep playing my part in the first one. That's not marriage. That's manipulation. I was scared, she said. I didn't want to lose everything. You already did, I told her. You just didn't notice until it was gone. She wiped her face with her sleeve, still not saying much. I want a clean break, I said. No drawn-out arguments, no second rounds. We split everything as agreed. We finalized the papers, and we go our separate ways. She nodded, clearly understanding now that I wasn't there for negotiation. Will you ever speak to me again? She asked. I don't know, I said. That depends on who you become after this. But right now, no. She took a breath like she wanted to ask something else, but stopped herself. You don't need to say anything more, I said. We're not going to find peace in this conversation. The peace comes later, when it's all over. I did love you, she said. I loved you too, I replied. That's why this hurts more than it should. We sat in silence for another minute, the noise of the cafe around us, but it all felt distant. Finally, I stood up, put on my coat, and looked at her one last time. I hope you figure out who you really are, I said. Because right now, I don't think you even like the person you've been. She didn't answer. She just nodded again, and I walked out. Not because I was running from anything, but because there was nothing left to say. The day the papers were finalized, I didn't feel anything. No relief, no anger, no sadness. It was just quiet, like finishing something you didn't want to start in the first place. I signed everything without hesitation, handed the envelope back to the assistant at the lawyer's office, and walked out without looking back. That was the last step. There was nothing else left to do. No conversations, no decisions, no chances. I had done everything I could, and now it was finished. That night, I packed the last box of my things from the house. She wasn't there. We had agreed on a schedule to avoid seeing each other during the move. It was easier that way. I didn't want to spend another second in that space pretending it was still a home. I took only what mattered. I left the rest without a word. I didn't take keepsakes or photos. I didn't care about any of it anymore. Everything that used to mean something now felt empty. Not because it was fake, but because the person I shared it with had already stepped away from it long before I did. After I moved into the new place, I started getting messages from friends and family asking what happened. I didn't explain the whole story. I didn't send them the screenshots or the folder. I just told them the truth in plain terms. She wasn't honest with me, and the marriage couldn't survive that. Most of them respected the silence. Some asked more questions than I cared to answer. A few tried to defend her, saying maybe it was just a mistake, maybe it could have been fixed. I shut those conversations down quickly. Anyone who thinks betrayal can be undone with time doesn't understand what it actually does to a person. I didn't try to replace her. I didn't jump into dating or start telling myself I needed to move on right away. I took my time. I focused on work. I cleaned up the apartment. I got used to waking up alone and coming home to silence. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't unbearable. It was just life without the parts one used to depend on. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I felt like someone who learned something the hard way. She tried to reach out once more a few weeks after the papers were signed. She sent a message saying she hoped I was okay and that she missed talking. I read it once, deleted it, and blocked her number. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because there was no reason to keep any part of her in my life. Not even as a memory. Not even as a conversation I might return to later. She had her chance to speak honestly, and she chose not to. That was enough for me to be done for good. There were days I thought about what would have happened if I never found out. If I hadn't seen her name on that list, if she hadn't left her laptop open, if I had just kept going like nothing was wrong, I probably would have kept trusting her. I probably would have stayed loyal to someone who had already replaced me in her heart long before I realized it. That thought made me sick at first, but later it just made me grateful. At least now I knew. At least I got to walk away with the truth instead of living in a lie I never agreed to. I still don't know what she told people. Maybe she painted me as cold. Maybe she left out the parts that made her look bad. I don't care. I didn't need validation from strangers. I didn't need anyone to pick a side. All I cared about was getting out with my head clear and my self-respect intact. And I did that. That was the one thing she couldn't take from me. Sometimes I hear people talk about forgiveness like it's something you owe someone, even if they don't ask for it properly. But I don't believe in that. You don't have to forgive someone who never tried to make things right. You don't have to accept what they did just because time passed. I didn't carry hate for her, but I also didn't pretend everything was fine. I accepted what she did and chose to leave it behind without turning it into a lesson I had to be thankful for. Not everything has to be turned into growth. Some things are just wrong, and the right thing to do is walk away. Now, I live in a smaller place, but it feels better. It's not filled with memories that make me second-guess myself. It's not haunted by broken promises. It's just quiet, and for the first time in a long time, that quiet feels honest. I don't know what's next, and I don't care to predict it. All I know is that I've done what needed to be done. I didn't run from it. I didn't bury it. And I didn't let her twist it into something else. I handled it like a man who wasn't willing to settle for being treated like a placeholder. This isn't the story I thought I'd live. It's not the way I wanted my marriage to end. But it's real. It happened. And I survived it without losing who I am. That's enough for now. That's all I need.